Welcome to the next in the series of AUVSI Cascade Chapter webinars. We're proud to bring you these webinars. We're bringing them monthly. This was a new concept in response to a lot of our in-person visits not being able to happen. So we have started doing remotes and have been going very well. We have some great topics and great speakers. I want to thank all of them. I also want to thank all of our sponsors, especially our platinum sponsors, Hood Technology, Northwest UAV, longtime sponsors, original founding members, companies of the Cascade Chapter. They've been with us for a long time and really is important part of the community. We also have North Aerospace News, great magazine that chronicles all things about the aerospace industry, including the unmanned industry here up in the Northwest. Really appreciate them doing what they do and highlighting the various companies and various aspects of the industry. Near Space Corporation and the Tillamook UAS range. Near Space Corporation has also been a very long time sponsor and very active in the chapter, and we really appreciate that. And of course, the Tillamook range is a great place with a lot of very interesting terrain features and ability to go over the ocean significantly. So if your system requires some unique features or some complex terrain, they have some great infrastructure out there and a great group of people that can support testing of your systems. EPB&B Insurance, they've been a longtime sponsor and really doing a great job of insuring folks throughout the unmanned industry and making sure that that we all are doing business and managing risk. They do a great job of it. And of course, Perkins Coie, they have really been a part of a lot of companies in the industry for a good long time, at least 15 years that I know of, and I'm sure longer than that. They have been providing great counsel, including IP management and other services to companies in the UAV unmanned industries. And technical tooling, if you have some complicated, complex, difficult tooling or high volume tooling, these guys really do a great job, and I highly recommend them and really appreciate them being gold sponsors of the chapter. And of course, Orca Capital and Wendy Kellington, these folks are really stalwart members of the chapter. They also have great representation and support from on our board of directors, and really appreciate what they do. So thank you very much for coming to the AUVSI Cascade Chapter webinar. We really appreciate you guys being here. I will turn it over to Lori now, who will talk you through the logistics of it and get the program started. Over to you, Lori. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So our agenda today is up until 12:30. We'll have the presentations. That might end a little sooner than that, but in any case, we'll have the Q&A, of course, and then networking afterwards. And at 1 o'clock is when we have the closing remarks by Jeff. So, but with that, we'd really like to shout out to Silicon Forest Electronics. They are the event sponsor today, and that's why you didn't have to pay a fee for today's event. And with us, we're very thrilled to have the founder and CEO, Frank Nichols, and he's going to say a few words. Frank?
Thank you, Lori. Frank Nichols, I'm the CEO of Silicon Forest Electronics. We are in Vancouver, Washington, and we build aerospace and military products, electronics for many of the folks that are around the Pacific Northwest and across the United States. We also have a significant intersection between things that fly, things that navigate on the ground, and things that go underwater that are all unmanned systems. they share one common thing and theme, and that is electronics. It takes electronics to run the world today, and that's what we do. Our customers design the electronics that go into the various platforms, and we build those electronic printed circuit boards and the assemblies beyond the board. In particular, we have things that are work with in the Army system, leader-follower programs. We have things that are underwater for inspection of hulls and piers, and those, of course, those things that fly, which are the predominance of our gorge technology, are things that fly. But there is a significant intersection of what we do in the gorge, what we do here in Vancouver, and the rest of the unmanned systems in the world. So that's the end of my part of the presentation, and certainly get in touch with me or Jay Schmidt. Either one of us be happy to give you a virtual tour, or we can even do a real tour too if you stop by. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thanks again, Frank, for your sponsorship. We really appreciate it. First, I'd like to introduce Steve Tibbetts. He's the chairman and CEO of ZEVA Aero. Bruce Agnew, who's director of Cascade Center and ACES Northwest Network. Scott Kuznicki, programs director, Discovery Institute. And then again, as I mentioned, our moderator, Rick Stevens, he's a senior aviation planner, a remote pilot, works with WH Pacific, which is an NV5 company. Steve is going to kick us off in the presentation today. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to be here to talk to you all. I sparked some interesting conversations for the discussion later on. So I just want to start off with a little bit of background, how my history of how I got here. And ZEVA stands for Zero Emissions Electric Vertical Aircraft. And we're all about, turning this whole thing into the Jetsons utopia, so to speak, and very exciting to be a part of what's going on right now. So a little bit about my story and my background is back in, about 2003, I had this idea about putting a folding mountain bike in the back of my 172 and flying in and riding the last mile. And I thought, what a great way to utilize the airspace, sort of reinvigorate general aviation. And I was really excited about it. But what I quickly learned is that all the little airports that I knew of growing up had vanished. So there's like over 500 small airports between Seattle and Portland that have gone away very quietly. They become victims of developers and condos. So that was super discouraging. So this is, back in 2003, I started thinking about this. Well, how, wanting to take advantage of air travel for local flights and not having airports was a real problem. So I actually, started thinking about it and looked at a number of different things. But in 2005, I wrote a grant proposal to NASA entitled EVA, Tilt Rotor Electric Vehicle for 21st Century Atmospheric Flight. So, at that time, nobody was really looking at the space. I got 2 thumbs up on the grant and 1 thumb down, so I didn't get the grant. You had to have all 3. But I built a model and I messed around with it a little bit, and then I, kind of didn't have money, so I lost interest. Didn't lose interest, but I put it on the shelf. So 2017, we learned about the Boeing-sponsored Go Fly prize, which is $1 million X Prize. So we put a team together to go after this. So all of a sudden, the world had caught up to my idea, and everybody thinks it's a good idea to look at eVTOL. And just after that, in 2018, Uber Elevate 2 happened. So this is an example of one of their vertiport concepts. So Uber took it upon themselves to sort of engage the industry and dictate how they see this whole eVTOL market happening, specifically in the area of air taxis. But it really served to kind of galvanize the industry and get people thinking along these lines. So in 2020, here we are, there's over 120 vehicle companies. Some people say there's as many as 180 vehicle companies. And the market just continues to heat up, and the analysts are getting involved, and there's all of a sudden big money's jumping in because they see that there's trillions of dollars at stake. So, Uber, Toyota, Hyundai, Intel, Boeing, these guys are all making huge investments. And, like I said, the analysts are getting on board and saying, Morgan Stanley saying $1.5 trillion globally by 2040. So what we're involved with here is a paradigm shift. The shift, I believe, to eVTOL transportation represents the largest market opportunity of our lifetimes. In fact, just this week, Frost & Sullivan report came out. They predict 430,000 urban air taxis by 2040, which is very much online with where we're at. So this is how, this is ZEVA specific here, how we see the whole thing rolling out in time. 2020 eVTOL burst onto the world stage. I think that through the GoFly competition and the work that's being done at Boeing and Airbus and Joby, in 2025 we see air taxi service begins. Now, some of the companies are actually saying that they can pull that into 2023. I think that remains to be seen. But we see UAM being ubiquitous by 2030, and then by 2035, we think that there's going to be room for personal eVTOL ownership. And then by 2040, we believe consumer-owned eVTOL will become the norm, or the thing that people want to do. So the vehicle, how does the ZEVA Zero work? We are what's called a tail sitter. On the far right of the screen, you can see that we sit and take off and land vertically, and then the whole machine transitions into forward flight. And the differentiation, or the claim to fame, really to what makes us unique, is that we're using a blended wing body to create lift. So as we travel through the air, once we're in transition, we get lift from the body. So we're able to, basically use a lot less energy. And, whereas other vehicles like EHang and many others are hanging on the propellers the whole time, they have to burn the energy to just stay in the air. Whereas we can go faster and farther with about a 50-mile range. And so that's really the big differentiation, and it's getting the attention of a lot of people that are interested in this kind of technology. You get into the machine standing up vertically, and then you're prone as you fly. And did this for a number of reasons, but the whole design of the Zero, our first machine, revolves around the specifications of the GoFly competition. Obviously, in the future, we'll look at different vehicle architectures for probably 2.5 passengers and different accoutrements inside the cockpit. One of the things that we recognize is that that we really, by 2025, our goal is to make the Zero a flying robot that happens to be skilled at moving people and things around. So we want to be able to have full autonomy at that point. And obviously that requires, in our minds, having a conversational AI in the cockpit, and then full integration with regional air traffic management. I'm currently sitting on 2 NASA working groups to discuss how that all works in terms of air traffic management, how the vehicles communicate, and what algorithms are used to figure out how to keep people from running into each other, which is very important. We have a seasoned team, about 25 engineers and designers. We did attend the X Prize, the GoFly X Prize, in February of this year, just as COVID was unreeling, but no teams qualified, including us. We were behind schedule, and we weren't able to fly at the competition, and basically none of the teams were able to fly due to various reasons. But so the prize is still open. We are still involved, and the first team to run the course, so to speak, will get the prize. So, right out of the chute, we are different than a lot of the people following the Uber model of the air taxi service. We believe that there's a lot of usefulness in the eVTOL equipment for first responders and disaster preparedness. And so that's our initial target market is the first responder and the DoD markets. So, you know, we've got a lot of interests from the various armed forces divisions because of our speed and range, low heat signature, et cetera. So they have a number of different scenarios, such as, you know, hot extraction, ship to shore, resupply, litany of things that they could see using this vehicle for. So that's what we intend to do for about the next 5 years. In about 2025 or 26, we expect to pivot to the consumer markets. And our goal is to really make point-to-point travel viable. And, it's hard to know whether if we're going to reach this sort of utopian view or not, but it's certainly something to strive for. I've got a quick video kind of showing one of our concepts, which is a skyport. And we believe once the rooftops get full of VTOLs, we'll need to have different ways of docking aircraft to the sides of buildings. And so that's our SkyDock concept. So how does that relate to the transportation system at large? And in preparing for the talk, one of the things that I looked at was the sound transit system map projected out to 2041. And what dawned on me is that that's right in line with the time frame of this eVTOL paradigm shift happening. And so I think it's important for all of us to look at and plan for the eVTOL solution to travel as well as the surface transportation. So, like I mentioned earlier, you can see that very few airports in our South Puget Sound area here. One way that I like to think about eVTOL and vertiports is really you can think about them as being an airport in the middle of town. And so, we're in Tacoma. I'm most familiar with it, so it's easier for me to pick on Tacoma as an example. But we really have a unique situation here where there's an excellent confluence of transportation mode right almost in the heart of the city. And the idea is that, to be able to fly into an area like this and be able to use light rail or jump on the bus or, an Uber or Lyft or whatever your other mode of transportation is. If you can't walk, there's other modes of transportation within this area. One of the things that I noticed also is that, the Seattle-Tacoma area is not really even on the radar screen. If you look at people that are studying this, there's a lot of major cities that are jumping in and already have plans for and developing vertiports. And so I want to make sure that we're not asleep at the wheel here and that people recognize that this is definitely happening and we need to stay on track. So that's all I have.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Stephen. Wild times on the aviation frontiers, eh? So I've got one question already, but if anyone has other questions, please post those to the Q&A on the button below on your screen, and we'll get to all of those after everyone's finished their talks. Our next two experts are Bruce and Scott, veterans of speaking at webinars on this fascinating topic. Bruce is going to start us off, and then Scott's going to bat us in, I guess. Bruce?
Thanks, Rick. I also wanted to thank Steve. That's a great presentation. He and I have had some conversations about how we connect the vertiports along what I call the Cascadia corridor, along I-5 from Canada down to Oregon. And Freight House Square is a great example of that. I'm going to talk about a couple other opportunities, but let me outline what our organization, which is called the ACES Northwest Network, is trying to do on the surface. Then I'm going to segue to Scott Kuznicki, who's going to go into greater detail about one of the signature projects that we have called mobility marketplaces. And I think they can serve as the nexus and the connector between surface and aerial transportation. infused with all this exciting new technology with regard to electrification and autonomous operations. So the ACES Northwest Network is been around for a couple of years. We're a tech and major employer alliance dedicated to the acceleration of transportation technology. And we've to date focused primarily on surface, but increasingly Scott and I have, working with Lori and other groups, have gotten more engaged in eVTOL electric flight, recognizing that transportation is in fact a 3D experience. Our co-chairs are Tom Alberg, you see on the screen. Tom is the managing partner of Madrona Venture Group, and most significantly was probably one of the original investors in Amazon, and served on the board for 22 years. There was a very nice piece about Tom and his family and his transformative role in leadership in GeekWire this week. I'll send the link to Lori. And Brian Mistely. Brian comes from Detroit. He worked for Ford Motor and then Microsoft, and then he started his own company called INREX, which is a traffic data and global navigation company based in Kirkland, but has worldwide operations. A fascinating company. You read about INREX a lot in the newspaper when they rate traffic congestion in metropolitan areas around this country and the rest of the world. Now, I was interested in Steve's map showing where eVTOL is being explored, and it's really a shame that we are not on that map. And I think not only because of our, obviously our connection with Boeing and some really exciting companies in electric flight like MagniX, Roy Gonzarski up in Redmond has been testing electric planes, fixed wing over Moses Lake, and then Harbor Air up in Vancouver, a seaplane service. And of course, we're the home of two of the 5 biggest tech companies in the world, Microsoft and Amazon. And more recently, we've seen an exodus of companies and kind of migrating north from Silicon Valley. And so Google, Apple, Facebook have all expanded their operations here. We also obviously have a great university, University of Washington, and lots of great community colleges. So we should definitely be in the A list of deployment and testing up here in the Puget Sound area. And we have some really good alliances. We're big supporters of AUVSI. Emily and her team over at Aerospace Futures Alliance, another great organization. Yolanka and the Community Air Mobility Initiative has taken a leadership role in the topic we're talking about today, surface and aviation, the nexus and intersection, and they're working around the country. So Brian and Tom are also, I should mention, members of the legislative created Washington State Autonomous Vehicle Work Group. And they have been meeting for a couple of years, and our 2 guys, Tom and Brian, are pushing along with other board members support for Governor Inslee's executive order going back to 2017, Executive Order 1702, which talks about encouraging, Washington State encouraging innovation in technology in transportation. And sometimes we get pushed back by some legislators more out of fear of the unknown with the autonomous vehicles and legitimate safety questions. But it's important that we stay open for business and open for companies testing and deploying, both in surface and leveraging the homegrown talent that we have here, folks like Steve. Now, as you probably know, the timetable for autonomous vehicles has slipped. And there are lots of reasons for that. Basically, the technology it's proven to be more difficult to address all the situations that these vehicles find in a street, whether it's kids or dogs or balls coming out from the corner or reckless drivers. It's just a very difficult technology, and as pointed out in Steve's timeline, we may well see autonomous flight before we see widespread autonomous surface vehicles. So if you look at real quick, I'm going to just highlight a couple of points that ACES has been focusing on that lead to the opportunity to connect surface and aviation in these vertiports. We are seeing a complete recalibration of transit service because of COVID. You've probably read or experienced the fact that transit's ridership has plunged dramatically. We suspect that transit agencies are going to recalibrate their service, whether it's bus or rail, concentrate on high capacity corridors, the so-called arteries of the system, and then leave the capillaries of the system that kind of pick me up in my house and take me to the bus or train station to private companies, whether they're Uber, Lyft, Via, or nonprofit social service agencies like HopeLink. That will be the future. Before COVID, we saw an explosion of employer shuttles and van pools, taking people to work, mostly on the east side, and more recently to Tacoma as technology companies have expanded there. And the who's who of the tech companies, Microsoft, Expedia, T-Mobile, Amazon, Google. And they've pretty much shut those van pools down because of COVID with workers working from home. And we see now an explosion in Amazon Prime and Grubhub and Instacart and all these delivery vehicles circulating around neighborhoods. The E in ACES stands for electrification. And there again, it's a great intersection between surface and aviation in terms of electrification. Electrifying transportation for both personal and freight mobility will reduce carbon, and it will align us with the goals of a new administration coming in next year, which is pledged to work in a bipartisan basis to expand electric vehicle funding and provide incentives to developers and utilities to build electric charging and expand the reach of electric charging. And we've also, again, getting back to Amazon and Microsoft, we've seen a corporate commitment in the case of Amazon moving to 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. Their subcontractor is Rivian, which is a really interesting company. And Rivian will be featured in our ACES annual meeting on December 9th, and I'll give Lori the contact for that, along with Waymo, which is a leading autonomous vehicle company. One of the things that we've been working with AUVSI and others is SeaTac Airport. Steve mentioned Freight House Square. SeaTac Airport is the obvious focus for both electric flight. It's been pointed out by folks like Tim Turber at the Port of Seattle, who's a real leader in this field, that the SeaTac Airport is its own utility, which means it markets electricity at 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is half of what Seattle City Light and Puget Sound Energy, the neighboring utilities, charge. So there's opportunities for electric cargo flights out of SeaTac to places like Port Angeles or Bellingham or Wenatchee. And the port is also hardwired expanded electrical capacity to their North Terminal cargo facility. Roy Gonzarski, I mentioned him before yesterday when we had a forum with him. He had a kind of interesting point saying, you know, right now he lives in Redmond. He said, look, I can fly, if I wanted to fly to Wenatchee, I would, take time to get to the airport, go through TSA, perhaps in the future, go COVID check, wait at the gate, fly, 50 minutes to get to Wenatchee. And it would cost me $483. If I want to fly to New York City, round trip, you get under $500. And if I wanted to fly to say Seoul, Korea, you can get a round trip ticket for $800. The time and money involved in connecting to cities within the state is eye-opening. And if we can get a series of EVTOL and electric flight network going at airports, we will expand people's ability to get to these communities dramatically. So kind of in summary, the ACES, the benefits of ACES, obviously, number one is increased safety, reducing accidents and congestion, basically by preventing vehicles from hitting each other. Electrifying transportation will reduce the operating costs and reduce carbon. ACES, by allowing shared mobility, whether it's an employer shuttle, electric employer shuttle, COVID safe, or a connection to transit service from the neighborhood, we're going to see a reduction in traffic congestion because people will be sharing rides once they feel safe. And the centerpiece for what really brings all this together is something we call mobility marketplaces. And we believe that those, whether it's SeaTac or Freight House Square or Microsoft Campus or Terminal 46 in downtown or Google or Bremerton Airport, these vertiports we believe can become mobility marketplaces. And with that, I'm going to ask Scott to pick up the theme and go from there.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Kuznicki. I'm thrilled to be on another AUVSI webinar this year. I've had the distinct pleasure of cooperating with AUVSI and the Transportation Research Board for the Automated Vehicles Symposium, which took place this year virtually, last year in the Orlando area in Florida, and previously 3 years in San Francisco, California. And one of the things that I've learned about AUVSI is that the breadth of the program spans everything from the ADAS systems in a Tesla to what we're talking about today, which is potentially, and I think it's very likely to happen, fully autonomous electric vehicle takeoff and landing operations. So it's wonderful to be a part of an organization that sees the future and is cooperating to tell a positive story about the future and also to be very realistic about what this future entails. Well, what is the future for the Puget Sound region? As Bruce mentioned, we have been dealing in our ACES Northwest Network with revolutionizing, the revolution of surface transportation in this region, embracing the ACES technologies. And what you see here is a photograph of Bellevue in the foreground, Lake Sammamish is right in front of you, and Seattle in the background with saltwater Puget Sound. And you can clearly see both of these floating bridges. And the question that I would ask you is, first of all, do you depend on this transportation system? And I think most of us who live in Puget Sound would say, well, absolutely. I need to be able to get on the freeway and go places. I need to be able to cross those floating bridges. I need to be able to cross the Ship Canal Bridge. If you think about, even if you don't go into downtown Seattle, you probably cross a number of bridges that are at risk from a seismic event. And so the question that we ask then is, what happens when these bridges disappear during a Cascadia subduction zone event? If you don't know what that is, you should read up about what a Cascadia subduction zone event, a seismic event, could do to our region and how it could cripple our entire region. And so I want to talk a little bit about disaster recovery and then loop back around and share with you how our ACES Northwest Network plans with our dozens of collaborators have addressed resiliency in transportation in Puget Sound and how advanced air mobility is a significant and critical piece of that puzzle. So we want to preserve mobility during major events, not just natural disasters, but also some of the other events that we've seen that have crippled our freeway system and prevented first responders from helping people who are in need of medical care. I think that's a critical issue that we see, is what happens when there is a traffic crash that cripples I-5 for 4 to 6 hours. We saw that happen in Tacoma just a couple months ago. Even during these times, traffic volumes on our freeways are only down about 10% right now. And the ridership on transit is down 65 to 70%. So we're seeing that people are still using the freeway system, and we're seeing how critical it is. Also, what we recognize is that despite the fact that we are in the middle of this global crisis that is affecting economies all over the world, our region is uniquely positioned because of its extreme emphasis on tech and logistics. And one need look no further than the share prices of Amazon and Microsoft to see just how much money is still coming into this region. And one need look no further than the plans for downtown Bellevue, which include constructing office space and housing to support an influx of 25 to 30,000 workers over the next couple of years. That's a lot of people moving in to Bellevue, and that's a lot of demand on the transportation system. And what we've recognized, as Bruce and I have done some analysis related to travel trends in Puget Sound, and we realized that people are simply not going to commute the way that they have done in the past. Many people feel it simply isn't safe to get on a bus or a train. A lot of people simply don't have a use for that anymore because they're working from home. And what most people want is point-to-point commuting services. And they want those services to be environmentally and socially responsible. And so the other letters of ACES are accessibility, cooperation, equity, and sustainability. And that's what we're advocating for at the ACES Northwest Network. And the ACES technologies are the tools that we want to use and that we hope will be embraced by this region to take us into the transportation network of the future. This opinion piece in the Puget Sound Business Journal was pretty hard hitting. The first of many structural failures. So when I said that potentially during a Cascadia subduction zone event, a bridge could collapse or a bridge could sink, we watched a floating bridge sink in 1990. Fortunately, it wasn't in use at the time. That's not hyperbole. That's an inevitability, quite honestly. And so what do we do when we look at an isolated area like West Seattle and we say, well, the bridge is down? What happens if the lower level bridge has to close? The city of Seattle has already detected issues related to the lower level bridge. How do people in West Seattle access critical services like medical care? How can we bring emergency supplies to West Seattle when the bridges are down? How do we do that in an environment where perhaps we don't have access to airports? This bridge here is the replacement of the I-5 bridges in Fife, between Fife and Tacoma. This is probably actually in the city of Tacoma itself. And you may say, well, that bridge is new, it's not going to collapse. It probably won't collapse. But if Mount Rainier decided that it was going to be as angry as Mount St. Helens was some 40 some years ago, then we're probably going to see the bridge not collapse, it'll just simply disappear. What happens then when all 5 or 6 or 8 of these bridges that cross this river disappear and sever Tacoma from the entire South Sound? What happens then? And how do we replace that in a disaster? And how do we replace the mobility on these bridges in the inevitable traffic congestion that's related to recurring events, such as a major crash or a fire or some other incident? But if you look out from this picture, you can see there's a lot of options in terms of placing urban air mobility centers. We have the Tacoma Dome, which is near a Sounder rail station. And that Sounder rail station, of course, serves Seattle to the north, but it also serves Lakewood to the south, and Amtrak serves Portland from there. So there's our connections that we could make that are intermodal connections, multimodal connections, in fact, that could provide some resiliency against structural failures and structural collapse. Here we're looking at the Interbay area in Seattle. That's the Ballard Bridge, which I think a couple months ago decided that it was going to be stuck open. One of my friends posted on social media that only in 2020, when there's no traffic, could a bridge being stuck open cause you to sit for 3 hours. And so we have a maintenance problem with bridges. And if you look at the Interbay area, what you see is that, of course, Magnolia is up on top of a hill. And again, Magnolia is served by 2 bridges. One of those bridges is in dire need of replacement, the Magnolia Bridge. But the Interbay area is not that far above sea level. In fact, it's very close to sea level. And during a subduction zone event, a tsunami could easily wipe out Interbay. And of course, to the south of downtown Seattle, we're looking at another place that's just sitting just a few feet above sea level. And that is our beloved Boeing Field, King County International Airport, where the airport elevation, as you can see from this IFR plate, is only 22 feet. The touchdown zone elevation, the TDZE, is 18 feet. What happens when Boeing Field is underwater for a few minutes, a few hours, maybe a few days? Cleanup efforts take a long time. Will we be able to access the aircraft located at Boeing Field? And the experts are saying, probably not. Be prepared for that. Maybe it's better to have some aircraft at Renton Airport, where the effects of a tsunami would be greatly mitigated by Lake Washington. So what we're looking for is redundant links. That's what I've kind of been discussing here so far this morning. And these can happen not just, again, because of the likelihood of a subduction zone event, but from utility failures, from slope failures, from bridge collapses. Those could be caused by any number of factors. But the real thing that we need to understand is that our region will be imperiled if we don't have these links, okay? And this is a critical issue for us, is what do we do in this region where we're surrounded by water? It's absolutely beautiful. I think we all value and treasure the natural environment here, but it presents incredible challenges in terms of transportation, even when everything is working well. So let's talk about disaster recovery for a little bit. I happen to be the squadron commander of the Renton Composite Squadron of the Civil Air Patrol, which is the United States Air Force Auxiliary. We are called upon by the Air Force to provide search and rescue and disaster recovery services in all 50 states and in US territories. Some of my colleagues in CAP recently flew disaster recovery missions in Puerto Rico using unmanned UAS, unmanned aerial systems. And they did that in order to collect aerial photography and other information that was then used by FEMA and other agencies to understand the breadth of the destruction in Puerto Rico from the hurricane. So the disaster recovery phases are mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And I believe that UAS and advanced air mobility will play a critical role in how we transition to more effective and efficient disaster recovery operations. And when we're talking about the response to the disaster, we're talking about assessment of the situation, and that's where this aircraft comes in. This is a Cessna 182. It's owned by the Civil Air Patrol, which is actually a nonprofit corporation, despite the fact that it is the U.S. Air Force Auxiliary. And it operates the largest fleet of piston aircraft in the world. But the future is coming. And it's expensive to operate these piston aircraft. And even though we are all volunteers and we don't get paid to do this, it takes a lot of time to get these aircraft up in the air. And say we have to collect 100 photographs. I mean, it could be a 3 to 4 hour mission. And in our area, if you look outside, say yesterday or next week or in December, you would say, I don't really know if I want to get up in an airplane and fly in that weather. And the truth is, you probably don't. But CAP routinely does disaster assessment. Then comes the reporting to our federal partners and our state partners, the analysis that's conducted on the ground by incident command teams, and then a plan of action. What do we need to do? And that's not something that CAP typically carries out. That's carried out by a wide variety of agencies that would be brought into the process by the incident command team that would be appointed by the governor. And then the evaluation. Were we successful in our actions? And if we're using an airplane to do assessment and evaluation and maybe even participate in part of the action, then why couldn't we use advanced air mobility tools like the electric vertical takeoff and landing tools that Steve just talked about in his presentation? And then the second question then that I would also ask is, well, how are we using these vehicles in other ways? Obviously, CAP supports the Air Force, but CAP has also flown hundreds of missions in support of COVID-19 disaster relief. And I'll give you just one example. It's very difficult to get from Denver to many of the cities in Western Colorado in the wintertime. And in April and March, and even now again in November, the Civil Air Patrol is flying needed supplies to isolated rural hospitals in Western Colorado and bringing back test kits that can then be evaluated in Denver, for example. And instead of making a 16-hour drive that might not be possible, they can make this entire turnaround flight in one day. And if we can do that in a Cessna 182, we can do that in an EVTOL vehicle. This map here shows you the Puget Sound Regional Council's anticipated regional urban growth centers. And of course, Bellevue is one of them. Seattle, as we know, is also another large, densely populated urban area. Tacoma, Everett, And you can see that these urban growth centers have been planned to take on various amounts of growth. But you can also see there's a lot of water, lakes, and bridges here. So what I did was I took the liberty of drawing some lines on this map. And these are some critical connections that you might imagine exist. One of them, of course, is between Seattle and Bellevue. We have major medical centers on First Hill and an Overlake in Bellevue. The other connection that we would make is perhaps between the medical center in Totem Lake and Everett. We have connections between University Medical Center and Totem Lake, between Bellevue and Valley Medical Center, between the University District and SeaTac Airport. If we wanted to access floating hospitals and the resources of the United States military, we would definitely want to have access from downtown Seattle to Bremerton. And remember, if we're dealing with a seismic event, it's unlikely that our ferry terminal will be operational immediately. And even perhaps between Silverdale and downtown Seattle. These are all potential routes for urban air mobility. And if you notice, only one of them connects directly to an airport, that's SeaTac Airport. Even the Port of Tacoma to SeaTac route, which would be a critical intermodal connection between deliveries that could come via aircraft and deliveries that could come via ships to the port, or the port could be used as a staging area. These are all essential disaster recovery routes. But they're also essential commute routes, as you might see. You might, oh yeah, I could see why people would come from the Kent Valley to Bellevue, or why someone would want to drive from Everett to Totem Lake or downtown Bellevue, for example. The area that I've circled in red is the South Everett Park and Ride, which last year at this time was over capacity. More people were trying to park and use the South Everett Park and Ride to access public transit and also form carpools than they had a number of parking spaces. So about 3 years ago, I was looking at park and rides throughout the region, and I was asking myself, why don't we do what they do in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and Europe and make money off these things? Right now, this is a parking lot. It's a nice parking lot. It has trees. We have a bus pickup area with some shelters, but there's no vertical development here. And if we have this demand to commute into downtown Seattle, and maybe we don't have that demand anymore, but we have demand to commute all over the region for meetings, events. You know, as we recover, we're going to have a much more mobile society that's going to take advantage of digital infrastructure and be perhaps constantly on the go. And we've seen that already looking at Interstate 405. There is more congestion now in the middle of the day than there was a year ago in October of 2019. And that's pretty stunning to think about. And what that means is that people's travel patterns have changed dramatically. What if we could do something totally different with this surface park and ride? Or any conventional park and ride. Here's a conventional park and ride. It's filled with cars, people lined up waiting for buses, people getting off buses. Not a lot of activity other than this kind of one single use that's been accommodated by a conventional park and ride. And I'm suggesting that perhaps we need to add some value and leverage the significant amount of private equity investment capital that's available even today to change these park and rides and turn them into service centers for mobility. And then let's go further and create revenue generating marketplaces here. And we can accommodate all these uses. We can give people what they need while they're commuting, while they're going about their day, while they're connecting to other mobility services. They can charge the vehicles, they can get they can purchase some food, they can obtain some medical care, they can buy some groceries, they might even be able to get a haircut. These are all things that are possible in a marketplace like this. And all of these small businesses and franchises support the ongoing costs of servicing the debt that is used to build these structures and the cost of maintaining and operating these facilities. But we're not just talking about cars. We're talking about the future of mobility, and that's why we're here today. And the future of mobility is awesome. What you see here is a mobility marketplace in 20 years with highly efficient solar generation facilities on the roof, racks of batteries that store that energy so that it can be used on the cloudiest days and overnight, electric vehicle charging stations throughout. We've moved on to new mobility services that people find attractive, safe, and easy to use and flexible. And we're still parking a few cars, but these blue squares that you see are my pathetic attempt to create artwork in PowerPoint. And that's a meeting center. It's a comfort station for drivers and operators. It's a technical center, an operations center for urban advanced air mobility systems, right there, one level below the rooftop deck, where vehicles just like Steve Tibbetts' EVTOLs are going to land and take off, connecting people to all of these mobility options on the surface. And while they're on the go, they can pick up their Amazon package, grab a bite to eat, pick up a prescription, and hop on some surface transportation that whisks them away on call, on demand, to where they need to be. And I believe that the future of transportation is flexible access to a wide variety of mobility services. And as we've learned today, the likelihood that that will be advanced air mobility is extremely high. I would say it's inevitable. And advanced air mobility plays a critical role in connecting these regionally distributed mobility marketplaces. Let's call them park and rides that finally grew up. So we certainly want to concentrate the services that commuters and the traveling public want. We want to create a flexible design. As you saw there, we're talking about single flat level parking decks that could be completely reconfigured in the future. I talked about amortizing the capital costs, but the important part is that it isn't just all about an old fixed route, fixed schedule model that's no longer working for people in this new normal. And that's why we want diversity and innovation. You're looking here on the right at GM Cruise's fully autonomous surface vehicle with private separated passenger compartments. This is something that people have said that they want in this future. They want to know that they're in a safe place and that they don't have to worry about coming into contact with other people when they're trying to travel to go about their essential business here. And when the pandemic is over, who doesn't want to be in a private cabin in a shared ride vehicle where they can conduct a private conversation on the phone? I think that that's the future that we see. And so that diversity and that innovation is, as I mentioned, these individualized services that replace these outdated models. And most importantly, it's a transformation that will be sustainable hubs for EV charging. And that EV charging, interestingly enough, includes battery swaps for EVTOL vehicles. And perhaps we'll have a chance to talk about that during the Q&A. This is the Voloport that was constructed in 5 days in Singapore. Had an opportunity to visit this site last year during the Intelligent Transportation Society's World Congress event in Singapore. And I was able to snag an exclusive tour of the inside of this facility, which is very exciting. This is a modern check-in station. And just as an aside, since we're talking about autonomous vehicles, the check-in is fully automated. You don't even have to talk to a person. And you see the green circle on the floor. All the pilots here know that you need to know how much your passengers weigh. And this is their unobtrusive way to obtain someone's weight. And I found it humorous. And they said, well, everyone will stand inside the green circle, and they have no idea that the system suddenly records that their mass is, 82 kilograms. So I thought it was very interesting, the thought that went into the customer experience. And that's what this is all about, right? Is the customer experience. I want reliable, swift, safe, quiet. That's what EVTOL is all about. Quiet travel. These are not helicopters. You will not be hearing these vehicles land on the roof of the hospital to deliver essential supplies or to pick up someone who needs to be taken to a level 1 trauma center across the water. And there's a picture of Volocopter's vehicle, which has a lot of propellers. But having seen it, and if you witness it in operation, you would say, wow, that is incredibly quiet. And this is the future. Those 100 and some companies that Steve mentioned are working on these safe, practical, efficient, sustainable transportation vehicles of the future. And Bruce and I and the ACES Northwest Network fully support integrating this into our mobility ecosystem to give people the choices that they need so that they can go about their business in the future. I'd like to invite you all to our ACES Northwest Network 2020 annual membership meeting, which will be on December 9th. You can go to cascadia.center/events, and you'll be able to register for our event there. We've opened it to the general public this year, thanks to generous support from Verizon, Lyft, and Amazon. So we're very, very happy that those companies see the value of what we're doing and continue to support us. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we are providing leadership, resources, energy, and results in the Pacific Northwest. That's what Bruce and I are seeking to do for you and for all of our members, partners, and friends at the ACES Northwest Network. And finally, I invite you to please find us on LinkedIn and follow us, and we'll keep you updated on what we're doing to transform mobility for the better in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Scott and Bruce. It was a very optimistic and enlightening future that we're looking forward. And also to thank you, Frank and Steve, for the same very positive perspective about the future of aviation. We have probably just time for one question, but it's kind of a deep question. It's this idea of safety. You know, we're going to, I know in the Puget Sound region, there's been a lot of concern about helicopter operations for nuisance noise and many other considerations. But on the safety issue, if all four of you would consider weighing in on probably four aspects of safety: rotor motor failure, what fail-safe procedures there are in place for that, failure of avionics in any way, GPS, loss of connectivity, the potential for collisions or crashes resulting from one or both of those particular errors, and lastly, the potential to monitor cyber security for aircraft. So for the four of you, please jump in on air safety issues for advanced air mobility.
Well, I defer to my colleagues on technical issues, so I'll pass on that.
And I will defer to my fellow panelists and then add anything that could be added at the end. But I think, Steve, you probably have some great insights into this.
Yeah, I could write a whole book on each one of those subtopics, though, Rick. So I'll do my best. From our perspective, we plan on having what's called a ballistic recovery system. So it's basically a rocket-propelled parachute that deploys very quickly and is able to catch you at a relatively low altitude. Now, there's still kind of a danger zone between 0 and 300 feet, but one of the advantages or what we're doing is we don't mess around hovering below 500 feet. We get up and we get going really quickly. So there are obviously it's the front and center in our design considerations. By the time we are hauling real human passengers or breathing human passengers around, we will have a ballistic recovery parachute system installed. As far as collision avoidance, excuse me, the first mode, if you will, is having a robust air traffic management system, regional air traffic management system, or urban air traffic management system that prevents you from having, collision courses. And I have algorithms that I've envisioned. I have no idea if that's how the FAA and the other commercial interests are going to deploy it, but essentially, you break up the airspace into what I call voxels or four-dimensional pieces of real estate in the air, X, Y, Z, and time, and you basically your vehicle requests leasing that space, and you're the only one that then it's allowed in that piece of airspace at any given in that time window. It's not a difficult algorithm, and the artificial intelligent computer that's at the center directing the air traffic will communicate that back and forth between all of the vehicles. But I still, obviously that you can't control a flock of birds. So each individual vehicle will have to have detection and collision avoidance. The nice thing about air travel, as Bruce alluded to with respect to autonomy, is that you don't really even have to know what it is. but you've got 3 dimensions to avoid it. So if you detect something, you just fly around it or avoid it the best you can. So in that sense, it's an easier problem to solve in terms of autonomy and collision avoidance. The third thing that I would mention is that cybersecurity is a real issue. It's hard to know how things will play out there. We have, as time goes on, we will implement the best cybersecurity algorithms and technologies that we can find for making sure that the control of our aircraft don't fall into hands that aren't intended to be controlling it. And then I guess the final thing I'd like to say is that one of the key things that we're doing is our design is very sensor laden. So we're monitoring not only voltages and currents, but temperatures of individual battery cells and motors and controllers, so that the idea is that we can predict as best as possible some kind of a traumatic event that's going to happen in the near future. The beautiful thing about eVTOL is you don't have to fly 5 miles to get to an airport. They can land anywhere. So the idea is that if you have 2 minutes to predict that you're going to have an engine failure, just get the thing on the ground as quickly as possible. So there's a number of things that we've thought about in terms of safety, and I think that we'll get there. I would say that I like our approach of doing DoD, markets and first responder markets, simply because it's not necessarily flight over congested urban areas. I think we need to get millions of flight miles on these vehicles before we put them right over urban zones, and that's how my philosophy differs from the Uber mantra of we're gonna put up eVTOL air taxis 2023. I think that there's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg problem there. So Rick, I don't know if I answered.
No, that was excellent. We only have time maybe for one more question.
Hey, Rick.
There's so many, but we're going to have a discussion. We're going to have time for networking afterwards. So we have till a few more minutes for another question. But there was a more comment on this particular one.
Yeah, I want to back up what Steve was saying. He mentioned ballistic aircraft parachute recovery systems. And if you've ever heard of a company called Cirrus Aircraft, Cirrus builds the SR and the Vision Jet, and their aircraft are all equipped with ballistic recovery parachutes. And in the 60-some incidents where the parachutes have been deployed, there have been 0 fatalities. And that's in a standard airplane that's maybe moving along at 150 to 200 miles an hour. And, the pilot becomes disoriented, they have an engine failure, something happens, and they pull that chute, and the airplane comes safely to a rest on the ground. And it's fascinating to think about, how effective ballistic aircraft recovery systems are in terms of preventing fatalities. And I think, Steve, you touched on this. We have access to an enormous amount of data today on the operation of all systems in any kind of an aircraft or an automobile because of microelectronics, of course. And what you say is absolutely true. The small piston engine manufacturers have discovered that they can collect information on cylinder temperatures, for example. And if you subscribe to their service, they will send you an email and say, we think your number 5 cylinder is going to experience a ring failure within the next 50 hours. And you will take your airplane to an airframe and power plant mechanic, and he will open up the engine and say, wow, that ring was about to lose it. And the way they know that is because they've collected millions of hours of data, and they've also tracked engine failures from their customers. And they say, oh, every time there's been a ring failure, we see this particular pattern of temperature cycling. And so what Steve says is it's not, brand new technology that we can't understand. It's the way we're already doing things. And to transition it to an electric vehicle, which of course, as we know, uses no fossil fuels, has a lot fewer moving parts, frankly, is a lot less complicated, is really a convergence of 2 incredible technological advances that are going to not only save lives, but make air travel more reliable, efficient, and fun and quiet.
I fully agree with you on that issue of the parachute fail-safe. look at the, looking for everyone who's attending at the screen behind you, Scott. We have two environments where a parachute system actually would probably create additional hazards. A water landing with a parachute could be actually even more dangerous for the crew than without the parachute. And parachute operations in a high-rise area of an urban center is really problematic with the parachute being, malfunctioning in contact with buildings. But I don't want to cast aspersions on that as a necessary fail-safe. Saying that these issues need to be worked out. If we had more time during the Q&A, I was going to ask you to discuss this idea of transitioning, because as you said, Scott, and you were alluding to, is it probably won't go straight from aircraft at taxis. That's probably going to happen after we have cargo deliveries, emergency services, and as you said earlier, as you all said, a lot of hours of safe flight time intervening between this notion of, as you said, Frank, the Jetsons' dream of just hopping into an aircraft. But we need to close our time now, so we have a networking opportunity. Everyone, please stay with us to continue discussing these ideas. I also had a lot of questions, and we've been discussing these before on these transitions and on the locations for vertiports. I mean, this is an amazing idea to place them with park and rides and parking structures. But as someone who's very involved in airport master planning, I have a concern I've often shared that airports may be left behind in this network if the FAA doesn't drastically change its forecasting and its funding programs. And thank you all. Great topics, great presentations.
Again, our platinum sponsors, our gold and our silver, which we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. I really appreciate your continuous support, and our events and our mission could not be accomplished without your support.